I do want to bring in our guest, Scott Bischoff, who you guys know who Scott is.
Dog.
Go to Scott. He takes care of us for all things NFL draft, all things Detroit Lions. Of course, he does great work at Detroit Lions and NFL draft analyst at DetroitLionsPodcast.com. And he's a staff writer at FootballGuys.com. Please welcome the one, the only, Mr. Scott Bischoff. Scott, how you doing?
I'm good, guys. How are you? How are you all?
We're doing good, Scott. We're fired up, Scott. We're happy to have you. The draft a little over a week out. This is the time where the mock draft, Scott, they just don't hit the same, Scott. And now we've done so many of them where it's like, all right, let's just get to the dang thing. We're at about a little over a week. But how's it been for you in just kind of where the Lions are as a team, talking about their draft pick? I know a lot of people we're talking trading up, trading back. Where are you at with just what they should do? Because I'm going to, after you answer that, did you see Mel Kiper and Field Yates' draft, their mock draft? I don't know if you checked it out. I wanted to surprise you, but I wasn't sure.
No.
Oh, thank God. Okay. Before we get to that, where are you at with what the Lions, what's the feeling for you, Scott? What's the move at 29 before I kind of get into Mel Kiper stuff and you can kind of react to it?
I get the trade up stuff. There's a few players I think that would be really interesting to trade up for. Jared Verse. Laitu Latu would be really intriguing. Quinion Mitchell is another one, but how far do you have to go? And everything I just said is going to be negated by what I'm going to say now is there's a window. They have a 91 pick window between pick 73 and 164, but they don't have a pick. And, if you're Brad Holmes, or at least a fan of Brad Holmes' work, you want him to have more picks, whether there's third rounders or whatever they are. So the only way to accumulate more picks in that window is to trade down. I don't know which way they're going to go or even stay there, but I would think that it would be much more reasonable to think about a trade down scenario than a trade up scenario. I think they've been linked a lot to Darius Robinson from Missouri. I would understand it, but I wouldn't love that pick. But they're also in a spot where, it's pick 29. So it's not like taking Hutchinson second overall and thinking, okay, that's the greatest pick. Pick right. 29, it's late. So there's 28 players that are going to go before them. So there's going to be things to pick apart with whoever they take at 29. Maybe it's a receiver, and maybe I'll be surprised because you could take a receiver at 29 and get a really good player in this class. That's kind of where I hope they go, but that I'm not necessarily expecting that either. So,
well, I'll ask you before we get to the fellas here, just to react, because we're going to break this down later and kind of give our thoughts on it. But Mel Kiper, Field Yates, they had I think it was 100 pick mock where they alternated picks. And I don't know who selected these players, but I do know the first 3 picks for the Lions. And I'll just give you all 3 of them, and you can kind of give your thoughts on each player. How would you feel if this was the draft, the first 100 picks? At 29, one of them have the Lions taking Darius Robinson. At 61, they have the Lions taking Javon Bullard, safety from Georgia. And then at 73, they have the Lions taking Bub Means, wide receiver from Pittsburgh. So Darius Robinson, Javon Bullard, Bub Means. That's their first 3 draft selections. How would you feel, Scott, if those were the selections?
I would not love the Bub Means picking at that early in round 3. Bullard's a good football player. It's just safety. We talked about this maybe a month ago. The safety position isn't necessarily a void. They have players there. I suppose if you do that, that allows you to weaponize maybe Brian Branch a little more than they were able to in year 1, which is good. That's a good thing. But there's a variety of ways in doing that. Robinson's fine. I think that some people have compared him to Cam Jordan from the New Orleans Saints. It's a rich comparison, but from a play strength, physical stature component, yeah, he looks like that. That's sort of his makeup. But I think he's significantly better as a 5-tech sort of closer to the ball defensive player than a player who's going to have success outside the tackle outside shoulder. I just don't know that he looks like a player who's going to win that way. But if you're asking him to be very physical and just kind of chew stuff up inside like that, yeah, that's fine. But Josh Pascal kind of does that for you already. He's a little bit richer version, but not much of Pascal. So the Lions liked Pascal enough 2 years ago to make him a pretty early pick, and doubling down on a player like that with pick 29 would seem to me a touch confusing unless they had other plans for him. I'm kind of lost as to what those other plans would be. I don't know that he's got the quickness and bend and flexibility to win as a traditional DN. So I do think he is more, he would be like a John Kaminsky replacement kind of thing, where Kaminsky's never going to win outside, but there are moments, especially 2 years ago, he was very disruptive closer to the ball. Robinson's like that, where, I suppose if you played a 5-man front and he did play as a 5, or at moments if you played with a true nose and as a 4-eye or as a 5, that's fine. But to me, and I could be completely missing the boat, so that happens every 12 or 13 minutes. I could be missing the boat on Robinson. They might have different plans for him. They might deploy him differently. I just don't know where, he's either a 4-eye or a 5 technique. Sometimes maybe a little more, sometimes as a 3, because he's 280 plus pounds. So I think he could live there. I just don't know how disruptive he's going to be. And I don't know, how you would settle for, a kind of like, okay, that's cool. He's physical. He fits their culture, all that stuff. That's cool. He is all that stuff. It would be kind of a borderline. You've already got that guy in house in Pascal. And I wouldn't totally love it, but I wouldn't hate it either. I think there's worse players that have been mocked to the Lions at 29 than him. He's a good football player. He's a very physical guy. He's got all that stuff. So, yeah.
What's up,
Scott? Want to throw this out there too, because I think another position that at least a lot of Lions fans feel like there's a need for is this corner position, especially with the Cam Sutton stuff. And I know we've already talked about it with you a bunch about different guys. To me, though, it feels like the front half of this draft, with the Quinyon Mitchells, Terrion Arnold, like there's a couple elite corners. If they don't trade up and get a corner or say even like an edge, do you see obviously, I know you said the trading back might be more realistic. Do you see them trade back, say, hey, let's just trade back, get one of these like corners? Is there any value even to doing that though, with the kind of this corner class, or where do you kind of see them going in that direction to kind of fill that void here for the Lions?
It's a great question. So I think, I don't know that we've talked about this particular player, and I think I can feel the eyes, not you guys, but people watching, the eyes rolling when I mention his name. Mike Sainristil from Michigan.
I love that.
He is a dude. I mean, he just is. And I'm such a hypocrite. I just bitched about what Robinson would be and how it would be redundant with a player that they already have. Sainristil would be redundant with Brian Branch. It's like there's a lot of redundancy there, but it's really not a bad thing to replicate a phenomenal football player on your defense. I just don't think it is. So I don't love the Kool-Aid McKinstry stuff. He's fine, but I just don't know how physical he is. And I would worry about some of that stuff with him. If the Lions at pick 29 stay put, don't make a move, take a guy like Mike Sainristil and come out to the podium. And I can already see the videos of Campbell and Brad Holmes going nuts. Can't believe we got this guy. Yeah. He is exactly the kind of player that the Lions love. He's versatile. He can do a variety of things. He would be a nickel corner. He's not necessarily an outside corner, but then you absolutely are freeing up Brian Branch to be kind of like a chess piece sort of weapon in that defense. And you're doing it by adding one of the best pure football players in the class who just happens to be small. But from a football intelligence standpoint, from a play style, all that stuff, he's a dude. He's a fantastic football player. In a trade back scenario, I don't know how far, it'd be great to move back 6 or 7 spots and then take him. That'd be great. That'd be awesome. because you're getting something to do that. Maybe it's a 3rd round pick, something.
Yeah.
But it might be, a little rich at 29 to take him. But the point is that, you just draft good football players. And that's kind of where the Lions have been for the last 3 years.
Scott, you and I align. If there was going to be a position that we wanted to take at 29 for the Detroit Lions, you and I both think it's wide receiver. But if you had to pick the 3 wide receivers that fit what Ben Johnson, the Detroit Lions, do the most and would actually have an impact in year 1, even year 2 and year 3, who do you think those wide receivers in this class would be?
He's looking for Xavier Legette. I already know.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah, one answer only.
That would be, it's Ladd McConkey for sure. But
yeah.
So to me, it's driven by what Jared Goff demands from the receiver position, and that means reliability, trust, and getting to your landmarks and getting to exactly where you're supposed to be at the right time. Because all this stuff is designed to be, we're in shotgun, and on my 3rd step, I want to throw the ball, which means you have to absolutely be where you're supposed to be. And if you're not, then I'm not throwing it there, and that's where stuff breaks down. So there's an element of trust that these route runners need to operate at for Jared Goff to feel comfortable getting the ball to them. To me, that's Ricky Pearsall from Florida, who gives you a lot more than just route running polish. He can do a lot. He is an exciting player that nobody really talks about. And I don't understand it. He's a really good football player from Florida, Ricky Pearsall from Florida. Ladd McConkey would be the same kind of thing. Outside, inside versatility, a little bit of redundancy with Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I don't know how that's a problem. And just the route running chops and the athleticism that is very obvious with him. And Legette's an interesting one because the Lions haven't necessarily done a lot of like bubble screens or jet sweeps or that kind of stuff where, they do a lot of pushing the ball down the field to short throwing stuff. But with him, you'd have to generate some creativity with getting him involved. But, there's that his vertical's crazy. Watching him play is fun. It's almost like he floats. With the ball in the air down the field, So it would be those 3, I think, at 29 or even a little bit later, where I would think there should be a lot of excitement behind that kind of player. It's just, at 29, I don't think Ricky Pearsall's an option at 29. I think that'd be a more of a trade down scenario, but he's a really good football player. I do think Leggett and McConkey are, though. I mean, I'll just ask you a question. If Ladd McConkey ends up with the Kansas City Chiefs, what do we think about Ladd McConkey going forward?
That's what I've been saying with all these wide receivers. Like, you could be mad if they're a lot of Lions fans. I feel like if they take wide receiver at 29, they're gonna be like, we already have wide receivers. Our offense isn't any problems. But then you're like, okay, but how would you feel about this player if Patrick Mahomes is throwing him the ball, if Lamar Jackson is throwing him the ball? And I think that reshapes everything when you talk about the corners, what you're saying about Darius Robinson. In reality, he's a solid player, but I don't ever think he's going to be a guy that gets you 10, 11 sacks. And if you're picking in the first round, that's what you would prefer for those players to be. But wide receivers, I think there's numerous guys that could be wide receiver 1s in this league, but he'd be playing a wide receiver 2 type of situation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It does feel like, too, and real quick to Scott's point, it's like I did a bunch of mock drafts the last couple of days for Mock Draft Monday today, and like it felt like every time I would like get to 29, there wasn't really there's not a bunch of, it's such a weird spot to be in at 29, but like even these receivers, like I kept trading back and I just kept trying different trade back scenarios to like 36, 38, 42. And a lot of those players like Mikey Sanders still, or, if you could trade a couple spots back, still get a Ladd McConkey, and like you could trade back, add assets to Scott's point, and still go out there and get these exact same guys you probably would snag at 29, and you add another pick in the top 100 picks. Like it just makes a lot more sense to me, and that's why I think Scott's spot on with that.
I mean, they could surprise us all and take a guard at 29, and all this stuff is new, right? But I mean, that's the beauty of what they've done, is they've set themselves up to take what they view as the best available football player that falls to them. Last year's draft was strange because none of us would have ever saw either of those players being paired with Detroit. So just trying to step out of the, all right, everybody's talking about Darius Robinson and Kool-Aid McKinstry and, some of these other Zach Frazier and all these other players. But what if the Lions do surprise you and take a guy like Sainer still and jump to the podium and say, hey, this is the best football player that we thought, in the 10 picks that went in front of us, we think he's a better football player than all those guys. Okay, I'm with you. Cool. So just trying to think about things in a different way than the traditional, this is what the mock drafts look like, when we know that a lot of that's driven by, rankings and that kind of stuff, which aren't necessarily NFL kind of rankings.
And I know, Scott, we fall into this narrative every single year where we do these mocks and it almost to a fault where we always rely on need. And then you get to the draft. And to your point, I'm so glad you brought up the Sanderstill point and then you watch the draft. And I think that's why people mentally are already trained to draft on need. And then Brad goes BPA. And now half the Lions fan base is upset. I don't know how it'll be this year. Maybe people are more acclimated to it. But
no, they're all going to be pissed. People,
it's an annual thing, Scott. You know all about it.
Yeah.
Lucas brought up a while ago too. Sanders still going in the first round. Like he had him in the Packers, just like as an exercise we were doing. And the more he said that, the more I thought about it. You're so spot on. You could argue that Sanders still is the best player at 29. You could, and even though the fit's there,
you could very easily argue that he is the best player at 29. But that he also unlocks Brian Branch too. So the idea of improving two positions with one pick is always a really good thing. It's like, when you draft tackle, it's better for your quarterback. When you draft edge, it's better for the corners. They don't have to cover as long. When you draft an elite corner, it's better for your pass rushers. So there's a little correlation that goes with what you're doing. And I think that while Sam was still small, I would argue to show me, show me where he plays small.
He plays big. Yeah.
I mean, he tackles, he hits. He's super smart. He helps get that defense lined up. There's just so much to like about his game, but I would love it because I think he's a great football player, but I'm sure that there would be a lot of pissed off Lions fans that night until, just like the Gibbs thing, until they saw him in week 1 and he looks the way he looks. And it's like, okay, we fully get it. Totally understand it.
And then it's all over. Yeah, that's how it always works. Scott, before Booner goes here, I want to ask you too, that with the edge depth, we again, going back to when we do these mocks, on my latest mock draft I posted here on our channel, I had the Lions training up beginning Latu. And we're big fans of him and what he can be. And I think if he didn't have the question marks about his neck injury, it's a big if. I understand that, the neck injury. He would be, I think, the first or second drafted defensive lineman first off the board, either Dallas Turner or him. I think you can make that argument. But then we tend to do this thing where it's like, okay, if they don't trade up, who's going to be there at 29? Jared Verse, Latu will be gone. Do you like Darius Robinson? Maybe they go corner. Maybe you can address edge later in the draft. One thing we always talk about, and I would love to ask you this, just with the edge depth. I know Nealon met with the Lions. Where are you at with the kind of the depth in this draft? I know you spoke on it kind of before, but what kind of players Nealon? I know Lucas brought up Adisa Isaac. We like him too.
Yeah.
Where are you at? Chop Robinson's flying up draft boards. What do you think about the edge depth in this draft? And if the Lions don't address it in the first round, do you think they could still get a guy with some potential there?
100. Yeah, they can for sure. That is so. Chop. It's funny you bring him up. Chop is the one player I would be really bummed about if the Lions did draft him.
Oh, yeah. Russ said the same thing too. You guys are in lockstep.
Yeah, it's just that there's a lot of he's not good with his hands, and there's an element of I want to win with my first step and quickness, and as soon as a blocker engages with me, I'm cool. I don't fight through it. I'm not great with my hands. He doesn't play with a lot of power. I don't know that he's going to help you defend the run all that much. So to me, it's like I don't think he fits at all. When you think about grit and all that stuff with what the Lions like their players to do, yeah, he's a finesse pass rusher and he does have an elite first step. But after that, it all just kind of washes away. And I just don't know if he's a fit. Right. So he may not even be a player that the Lions have that highly on their draft board. But as far as the class goes, I mean, there's good players in the class. It's not as good a class as it has been in years past. And I think that there will be better players going forward than there are in this class. If you're not getting one of the premium guys, you're getting a player who's gonna be kind of a project. And I think this is where the Darius Robin stuff is that the Lions need an edge. They do. He is likely to be available at the point in which they're drafting, so everybody just kind of forces that pick there.
Right.
Can you get him, a little bit later? Maybe not as big and physical as him, but you can get like Washington State has a guy named Brendan Jackson. He's good. He's a good football player. You mentioned Adisa Isaac. He's a good football player. I think he's a more complete player than Chop Robinson is. He just doesn't have that first step craziness that Robinson does. So, I think you can get an edge player a little bit later, or even survive the year with the Marcus Davenport signing and just hope that it works, right? So
don't say that.
Well, I mean, that's just kind of where they are. So
that's like my nightmare. We brought up like the reference, like I was like with the Lions pass rush and this whole Brad Holmes thing with the draft. It's like you go to bed and you start having nightmares, nightmare, and you go to your mom so she can calm you down. It's like, oh, no, it's okay. We have Marcus Davenport. We have James Houston. It's like, that's not helping you. Like, that's not making you go to bed.
It's not enough for sure. It's not.
Marcus
so
Davenport.
They need more, right? But I mean, the Davenport thing is it should give you a bit of a clue as to the kind of player they're looking for. Super physical. Obviously, they love the idea that you're athletic enough to turn the corner and stuff, but you better handle your business and your gap too. Chop doesn't do that kind of stuff. So Isaac does. He's a physical player. It's interesting. The receiver thing too is there's a little bit of this. Like Brad Holmes and company have tried the linear fast guys for a while. They tried Tyrell Williams. They tried Brashad Perriman. They traded last year in kind of a non-trade for Denzel Mims. Josh Reynolds fits that mold of, the taller, faster player. Adonai Mitchell is that guy. Like
I wanted to ask you about him. Yeah.
He might, it might be one of those things where he was productive at Georgia when he was at Georgia. He looked okay at times. I don't think he's remotely the route runner that the other players we talked about earlier are, but Holmes seems to have a little bit of a type, and it's the 6'3" guy who runs 4.4, who can occupy maybe demand that a safety sort of occupies that side of the field kind of stuff. So I think that Bub Means in that mock. He's a fast player, but I don't think he's remotely productive enough to be considered in round 3. Brennan Rice from USC, I think, is more of a match there than a player like Bub Means would be. But they do need a receiver. They need a player who can step in and be wide receiver 3 to start. I think it's Amon-Ra and Jamison Williams, and then Laporta and that kind of stuff. But developmental player who's fast, who can run routes and all those things. It's it's the cool thing about this draft, but also the hard thing to try to figure out is just that there's a few needs that they have, but it doesn't mean that that's where they're going to go at 29. They're going to take the best player that's there.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Scott, too, kind of looking outside the first 2 rounds, and I've seen a couple people ask this in the chat as well, and I think you've brought a couple guys up to us in the last couple of weeks having you on leading up to the draft, but some like sleeper guys for the Detroit Lions, especially like you look at last year, the first 2 rounds, probably couldn't pick, like we didn't know who they were going to go after, Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell, but those were names we all knew about. Are there guys outside of these first couple rounds to where you think might be those Dan Campbell guys, or maybe some new sleepers that you have found the last week since we've talked last?
I think we've talked about Mason McCormick from South Dakota State.
Yeah, great one too, by the way.
Yeah, he's a dude, right? So it's like he fits perfectly, but at a point, I think you could have taken him at pick 100. But I think as people have kind of gotten to see him a little bit, he's definitely a player who's now you would almost have to you'd have to take at 73, if not maybe even pick 61. Let's see. Texas State has an offensive tackle named Travis Glover. He's an intriguing developmental player. They need a swing tackle. Big physical dude. I'm trying to think of some of the other players who Nebraska has a safety. His name's Omar Brown. He's a good football player, really good football player. Trying to think of it's hard with the later one. This draft is going to be really interesting as you get towards the the middle of day 3, because with the COVID year and all that stuff, there's just not a lot of depth in this class. So I think you're going to take players who are going to help you on special teams. That's going to be their path to making this team. But you're looking at corners, safeties, linebackers, wide receivers who can block. Cornelius Johnson, I think, was a player we talked about last. Maybe not. I don't remember. He might fit. Kind of just from he's a Michigan guy. Those guys are all very physically mature players. They're smart football players. They've played in very important football games for a couple of years. Michigan's going to have a bunch of guys get drafted. And then I just think it's developmental offensive linemen. There's Dominic Puny from Kansas State.
Yes.
A really good football player. Delmar Glaze from Maryland. I think he's going to be a guard in the NFL, but a good football player who I think is a round 4 or round 5 type, where if that's the guy that you pair with Colby Sorsdale from last year, you hope that one of them works, right, and can step in and play at points as a guard, that kind of stuff. I mean, there's other names, but it's tough to project the later ones. I just would expect it to be special teams positions, and then developmental players. It's interesting too, because the running back class is a lot better than people give it credit for. I don't necessarily think the Lions would be really in the market for a running back until day 3. But then there's going to be a bunch of players who are intriguing players. At the top of the not in round 1, but starting say mid round 2, there's a bunch of really good running backs who can do everything. But then you look at a guy like Ray Davis from Kentucky, who's like, I think he was one of 12 kids. He was homeless, or 11 kids, something like that. He was homeless for a while. He's been to 3 different schools. Really good football player who can run it, catch it, all that stuff. But I think as a day 3 running back, that's kind of where the Lions find value in that kind of stuff. Like these guys who have been through it and gotten through it. They've already shown you how they handle adversity. Those are the players that Brad Holmes seems to covet.
Gotcha. And Scott, we talked about Brian Branch and Mikey Sanders still early, but how do you think X and O's wise, how do you think that would fit? Because then you talk about Ife Melifuanu, you want to see what you got with him, and then Kirby Joseph. So how do you think they would schematically free Brian Branch to how you were talking about earlier?
So I think he would almost be a player who you would ask to be like a robber kind of position. Closer to the line of scrimmage, more blitzing, pass rushing, defending tight ends, staying inside the box, but reading things and just being in and around the ball, which is his strength as a player. Going back to Alabama, everything he did, especially in his last year there, when they asked him to just kind of hang out in the box and just sort of, be a player who's a pain in the ass and difficult to deal with. You would be doing that with him by freeing him from coverage responsibilities. I mean, he's still going to have his coverage roles, right? But there would be times when you'd bring him on blitzes because, if Sanders still has, say, the slot receiver on that side of the field, I mean, if the tight end's not there or if a running back's not running in a route, he can come after the quarterback kind of stuff. And so I would just view it as almost freeing him up to be just an extra defender to just make plays. And sometimes that'll be in coverage. Sometimes that would be in run support. Sometimes that'll be coming off the edge when a quarterback might not see him. So there's so many ways and so much versatility in his skill set that freeing him up, definitely is a good thing. But it's not just him. It's you could also free up Sanders still too. Like, all right, Branch is going to cover the slot on this play, and Sanders still is going to kind of do some blitzing or that kind of stuff, like, because they're redundant in some of the things that they do really well, which are, high football IQ things, understanding what offenses are trying to do, limiting what offenses can do. I just think that it's better to have more of those guys on the field than less. And, from a schematic standpoint, it would definitely be like the Bill Parcells robber type, where they've had success with those guys. Aaron Glenn had that, and in the defenses he played in, they had that kind of stuff too. So it's, it's just a thought. It's not necessarily, there's no perfect way to deploy any of those guys, but you definitely would have much more skill and playmaking and intelligence and understanding with Mike Sainristil as opposed to without him. So, not trying to sell that too hard, but he's a really good football player who, mitigated a lot of things as a defensive player. And we also have to remember that he's very early in his transition from receiver too. So he's just going to get better. He's just small, right? So that's a good question as to what they would do. I just would view it as them sort of untethering him from coverage responsibilities all the time and letting him just go make plays, which you'd really want.
Kind of like that Tyrann Mathieu.
Yeah.
How they use. Okay.
And Scott,
all over the place, all over the field.
And Scott, before we go, I got one more question for you, and I just want your opinion on this because the more I see it, obviously I'm not as dialed in as you are. Like, what's the whole lot the Jackson Powers Johnson stuff? I believe Mel had him out of the first round. Before he was pretty a consensus top 20 pick. Now he's kind of early second. I know that was someone that we early in the draft process as Lions fans were like, if you can get him. Now it's like he might even just be there. What's going on with Jackson Powers Johnson? What changed? They haven't played football. Why is he falling? If he is.
So maybe we'll hear that there was an injury or something like that teams didn't love the healing on kind of stuff. I don't understand it either because like you said, the football stuff hasn't changed. I don't know if it's a position thing where I know he played center, but he's big enough. He's 6'5" and like 330 pounds. He can play guard, and I think he could be a very effective guard. I don't know. I don't have a great answer.
That's fine. I'm as confused as you are. I'm
not going to try. I don't want to make up some stuff either, but I think that there's been some injuries that have been talked about. And then, I think people worry about, or at least I've heard some discussion about how aggressive he is and having to be a little more patient with his hands. But, he won, I think he was the Pac-12 player, offensive lineman of the year 2 years ago. And this year he won the Remington Award. He's a really good football player. I don't totally get it. I had always thought that Pittsburgh would be a really nice place for him to go because they seem to love their centers, right? Those big, nasty centers. Philly needs one. Right. Kelsey just retired. They need somebody because right now I think it's Cam Jurgens who's going to slide over to center and they have a hole at guard. I don't know that I totally believe him falling out. I don't buy he's going to fall out of round one stuff unless there's injury stuff that we're just unaware of, which is a possibility. If he does fall like a long way where you're getting into like, mid round two, it's definitely injury stuff because his film is good enough that he should go, be somewhere between picks 20 and 35 range. He's going to be an interesting one. I don't buy it totally that he's going to fall out of round one. Unless there is, like injury stuff that we're just unaware of.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff, Scott. We appreciate you. You can check Scott out. Like I said, it's on his Twitter, which I have the @ there. You can check it out. Detroit Lions NFL draft analyst at DetroitLionsPodcast.com, staff writer at footballguys.com. Scott, we'll get you on next week before the draft. We'd love to hear you. Your thoughts on the players. All right. We'll catch you then, Scott.
Appreciate you, Scott.
We appreciate you for taking the time, man. It was big time.
Be well.
And there you have it. Mr. Scott Bischoff.